So I wanted to make this topic of, call it victimhood, blame, taking responsibility for everything as a focus for the show. So I'm thinking about that. And then on Instagram, you posted within days of me writing some topics down, you posted this and you pulled it out of your book, 10,000 No's chapter or page 80. And you highlighted, you said, this is true for all of us. How we frame and interpret the events of our life determine our destiny. And you posted that picture of out of your book, and then on the caption, or the info, you said, I may have written this over a year ago. I may know it to be true, and yet I still grapple with seeing myself as a victim when certain things happen. I just did it in the last 12 hours. And I hit you within a day or something like that and said, I want to talk about this. And you said, yeah, I've been grappling with this for the past 12 hours. Do you remember in
Yeah, I
retrospect what you
do.
were
I
dealing?
do. I'm gonna keep names out of it, but I had a situation because as you were saying it, I'm like, wait, what was I talking about? I don't remember, but I do know what it was. Um, and it was a little hit of essentially it was something with the podcast where I had someone on. I didn't know the guest beforehand, and usually I the way I get my guests is very, you know, instinctual. And it's always, it's kind of, people go, oh, you have such a wide array of people. And, how do you get them? I'm like, it varies. Like sometimes I seek them out. Sometimes they're suggested to me.
Right.
And this person I was actually kind of looking to fill a slot, and it was kind of specific. And this person was suggested. I saw something that they did that I'm just kind of keep it general so that
Sure.
there's nobody, you know, called out on this. But um essentially I saw something, I was like, yes, I that person seems great. We did it, totally hit it off. And then, I was doing all this promo stuff, and because of the COVID stuff, now we're doing it on Zoom. As of late, I've added more of the video promotional thing, along with the audio, even though it's an audio only podcast at this point. But I took a lot of time. I really do take a lot of time to go through my episodes and pull out the quotes that I think are teachable and really highlight the guest. And I cut together a few videos that I thought were awesome. And I sent them to this person's agent who I knew, who has actually been on the show, and just said, like, hey, just wanted to show you, that person was awesome and blah, blah, blah. It turned into a whole thing where it was like the videos could not be used because it turned into a whole thing with representatives and agents. And I actually, I understand it now. And I think part of the victimhood was I was feeling like, hey, I do all of this, not being paid, but do all of this because I love this, and I'm trying to help someone and shine light on them and all of that. And now I'm almost being slapped down, saying, you can't do it. Like I'm doing something bad. And I had that vibe of I was mad. I was like, why do I even do this? It was kind of that whole thing. And really, um, it wasn't really taking in the entire situation from the other person's point of view and what they wanted. It was really like how it affected me. And I think that's maybe the root of being a victim, is like you're just looking at like, you know, I did this, you're doing this to me. I mean, and I'd like to think I am not a victim in general, but I was being one. And it was, I saw a guy I hadn't seen in a long time. We had set up a walk, and we went, and I probably bitched about this for about 20 minutes, talking it through. And I was just aggravated. And then I finally was like, I understand the other side, and it's not personal. And I really didn't do what I needed to do to get what I wanted. It was on me,
Yeah.
really. And at the end of the day, everything's kind of on ourselves, you know?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're going back to our first talk together over your book, 10,000 No's, and you talking about it, profession, being an actor, profession of being told no, of being rejected. And I thought that's got to, it would seem like by proxy, it would weed out those who have a victim mentality. Cause how could you deal with that? You don't have, I mean, you talked about this, that not that you don't have control of your career, but man, you're going to just show up, do the auditions, whatever, and you're going to get accepted. You can't make yourself get on there. I can go and start a business. I can go, set up shop and sell. And granted, somebody has to buy it, but it feels like more control than what you deal with in your profession of kind of putting it out there and you're accepted or not. I mean, it's just hardcore to be a victim. It would seem like it would, again, shoot those folks out of your profession. Does it? Or do you still find people in it doing well who still have a victim mentality?
Mm, I think you still find them.
Yeah.
I think you still find them. I think there's still, um, and like I said, I think I'm someone who's very cognizant of that. And yet there I was catching myself
Yeah.
because I'm human, you just, but I think I guess that element of it, yeah, you can't really be a victim because yeah, you are told no so much that if you were a victim every time, I don't know if you would be able to
Be
move forward.
soul crushing. I mean, you've got to be,
But there are people who do well, I think, that could do well and still think that they're always getting screwed. I think that exists.
well,
Absolutely.
sure.
Probably in every field. Um, I actually think it maybe has less to do with how successful someone could be and more to do with how happy they could be. Because whenever you're in victim mentality, I think you're just kind of giving the power to everything and everybody else besides yourself. And when you're in the mode of saying, I take 100% of the responsibility, uh, you run the risk that, you're not doing a good job with that, but at least you're in control of your destiny in some way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
Um, for example, that scenario I gave you, which I realized afterward is probably really annoying for your listeners to hear because I'm not naming the person, so maybe they can't follow what I was saying. But
Okay. It's not the Inquirer. We'll let it slide.
but basically, in that situation, it's like you know, I didn't do when you come back and you look at something that's not satisfying to you, you just have to ask, well, what was your part in this? What was your part in this, and how could you do that better? And I guess along those lines, that instance changed one of my practices in how I do the podcast and how I deal with the guests.
Yeah.
I do something now ahead of time that I wasn't doing before, that I probably shouldn't, I should have been doing. And I was kind of doing everything on a handshake and a whatever. And now it's like I had to make it a little more official.
Well, I like that. We always lament about you get 100 positive reviews, let's say on a podcast, and you get that one negative. And of course, what's the one that sticks with you? It's that one negative. And yet, in all those positives, they didn't give me any critique that I could better myself with. And that one criticism, yeah, there's been so often I've got one. And even if I thought the person delivered it really poorly, I've literally made changes.
Yeah.
I've gone back and audited stuff and changed it, and it's caused me to try to seek out that criticism. It's hard to get though. It's hard to go out to fans or people that advocate for you and get real criticism. It's hard for them to see,
Mm.
and yet to adjust from it. Well, so talk about you mentioned power, and I actually want to come back to that because this one aspect of this victim being victimized and going forth as a victim. Now, I'm going to make the segregation right there because we're all victimized, but are we going to continue going forth as a victim? We talk a lot about reframing, and you actually have it in the book right there on the same page. And you said, you said your friend and past guest Tony, is it Torres?
Yeah. Taurus.
Torres made her way out of extreme poverty in a ghetto surrounding. You quoted her. I went through a stage where I started saying my parents are in sales because they sold drugs. So we can hear that and talk about reframing. There's a lot out there, and like we were talking before we started the show, I like coming at this as layman's terms. We're not psychologists here.
Yeah.
I didn't want a psychologist on there because we get down to the minutia and I said, yeah, but how do you walk it out? And I wanted to hit it from this layman's terms. So when you look at it at reframing and try to reframe stuff, it doesn't feel palatable a lot of times like that. Come on, your parents sold drugs. You're going to try to sugarcoat that. Feels like Pollyanna in that, but I'm sure there's more of the story. You put her in the book. I don't know her story, but for her to actually be able to reframe that in a way that maybe, I don't know if it was positive, but I guess she was able to look at it and separate herself from it and not go down the same path was your point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as actors, you're forced to reframe all the time because
True.
if you want the gig and you don't get most of the gigs you go for, what do you do with all of the rejection? You reframe it, however you can to empower yourself. A lot of times it's like, well, that's not the one for me. That wasn't meant to be. Maybe I learned what not to do in that audition, whatever it might've been. Or, there's just, there is really, I have something in the book where I talk about willful denial.
Yeah.
And, the point there is just kind of, if you really, when you're saying Pollyanna, think about this. Anybody who has changed the world in a major way, whether you're talking about, Gandhi, Jesus Christ, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, all very different examples of changing the world, but they've had a big impact on the world. At some point, let's take Bezos because everybody buys from Amazon all the time. At some point, what he was saying was crazy. It was like denial. It wasn't reality, but it was a reality in his head that he stuck to, that he eventually brought the world around to his truth. And now, yes, your packages are delivered like it seems like 2 seconds after you order them. You know what I mean? Like it didn't seem possible at the time. So there is an element of reframing that he must have had to go through because the world was probably telling him, you're nuts. Like, you can't do that. That's not how it's done. And I would say most instances, the people that we read about, the people that we talk about in history classes or whatever, there had to be some time period where what they were saying was considered crazy.
Yeah.
And that is, so it's like, what is the truth? If you don't see it in front of you, does that mean it's not true? Well, how do we move toward change? We move toward change because somebody, Martin Luther King, somebody has a vision, and then they convince the rest of the people to see their vision. So that's an element. It's not too far off of Tony Torres saying, oh yeah, they're in sales. They are in sales. What they sell is drugs and not good for you. But she was trying to hang on to the positive part of that narrative that would empower her and get her out of the ghetto, rather than thinking she was just, destined to be stuck there for the rest of her life.
Well, yeah. And to still be able to embrace it, that it did have whatever happened to her. I mean, her parents were her parents. So is that what she would desire for her kids? Probably not. But to take that and say, well, I can have this completely wreck me, or I can look at it and say, it gives me strength, gives me insight, gives me resilience that I would not have otherwise. I can use that to go out here and achieve. So again, it's not sugarcoating things, even again, back to your 10,000 no's that, I mean, when you go to the family gathering right now, well, literally today, you go to the family gathering, get together with your, siblings, parents, whatever. And what are they going to talk about in regards to you? Dude, you are playing opposite Kevin Bacon on City on a Hill. It's just about second season's coming out. It's great. You don't sit there and talk about how many rejections came before that. I mean, I'm sure you have a pile of them literally leading up to that one.
Oh, totally. I mean, but well, actually, where I thought you were going with that was, it's interesting that you didn't go here. So one of the reasons I even created the podcast that's called 10,000 No's, and then that's where the book came out of, and that's called 10,000 No's, is because back in the day, we're my wife and I are from the East Coast. We live in California at the present moment, but we would go back for weddings or whatever. And what people don't realize, like when you're an actor and you're kind of the only actor in the family, like nobody else is doing it. So you would go to something like that, and people, if you happen to be working right then, it would be kind of cool, because if you were on TV and people are like, oh, I saw you on such and such, and you're like, oh, cool, and it's nice. When you've been like unemployed for sometimes months, and you go back for a wedding, they're like, what are you up to? How's it going? Yeah, it's good. It's good. The voice goes high pitched, and like, they're like, oh, I saw you on such, Sopranos, a couple. It's like, well, yeah. And in your head, like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. And in your head, you're like, God, I shot that, whatever, 5 years ago, or
That check was a long time ago.
You know what I mean? They could have seen a rerun, but for me, I'm like, God, that was a long time ago. So, that the no's, the rejections, were something that was like a source of shame for me. I didn't want people to know that. I was always trying to be like, I'm fine, I'm good. And I think one of the, you talk about embracing the reality and reframing it. That's really what the whole podcast was. I was like, hang on, this is like weighing me down. I was getting crushed by my industry, and no one would have known it because I was making a living as an actor, but I didn't have the fire or the hope that I had started with. I was just getting crushed. That's the only way to describe it. And that's when I decided to start the podcast. And instead of hiding those 10,000 no's and that shame, it was like, hey, screw that. That's going to be my platform. Yeah, I've gotten 10,000 no's and I'm proud of it. Here it is. What are you going to say to me now? And then I'm also going to sit down with other people that you think maybe have it all made, and they're going to talk about it. And that's what it is. I mean, just, you brought up Kevin Bacon. He's going to be on the show right before our premiere comes out. So by the time this comes out, maybe it's already been aired. But to sit down with a guy like that, who has worked so much that there's literally a board game and a book called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, and to hear him talk about the no's, and to hear him talk about, like, when he's done with the gig, he's always worried it's going to be his last gig. Then you go, okay, you know what? I hit on something. I did hit on something. Like, if that guy's talking about it, then we all have that. We all have that shame, or we all have that challenge. Like, none of us has it easy.
Well, I like the exaggerated world you live in with it, because we're in an age right now when we know the culture, the younger culture especially, is, statistically, they're having such a hard time with failure. We joke about that with the kids, and it's true. I've got kids that we put in cross country every season. And when they're little, they're in this league, and literally the tagline of the league is everybody's a winner. So everybody who comes across gets a blue ribbon. So my little boy, who's unbeatable so far, gets a blue ribbon, and so does the kid that comes in last. I mean, it's sweet, but then these are the ones that graduate from college, go into the job place, and that first day of work, and the boss comes in and says, yeah, today you sucked. You're not making it. That is not okay. You're not going to get paid if that keeps up. And they're devastated because they have not witnessed this. They haven't gone through the necessary resilience. It reminds me too so much of sports. I mean, that's my background, is pro sports, and man, in cycling, it's such an elitist sport. It really is. And that was the joke there. You are as good as your last result. That's, if you won last week, you're king. If you lost, you're nothing, man. All we're talking about is the guy that won. I mean, you're nothing. Yeah. And of course, how many wins did I have? A few a year. That was it. Out of 100 races, a few. I mean, it was horrendous, but it's not. We've kind of come away from that culture. We're not used to taking the no's, not coming back to being resilient. And then here we again have that victim mindset. And you mentioned the word power. That's the one that comes to mind to me the most. And it's so difficult because, again, we can't be victimized, but say, how do I do that? And then not, like you said, go on a walk and complain about it and let it haunt you and give away your power. That's such a tangible perspective.
Yeah. Well, here, there's also this other thought about that, going on a walk, dealing with it, venting about it. There is something to I think it's okay to take something in, to see it. I do think it's okay to
Feel
gripe
it.
about something, to feel it.
Yeah.
I think where it could become a problem is where that becomes the new normal, where you're in that mode and you never get out. I think um for me, being forced to learn how to uh you know kind of bounce back because of what I do for a living, it's made the journey through some of that victimhood a lot quicker. I think
Yeah.
I can feel a pang of something and I can go, okay. I mean, that's what happened with that. That's why I was able to write that post the next morning, because I went through it, I felt a certain way, and then I kind of woke up and I was like, all right, well, you know, let's look at the history of what I've done. You kind of draw on your past times when you went through something and you came out, and how'd you get out. And so you get better at bouncing back, but it's okay to feel it. It's okay
Yeah.
to, it's okay to have those little moments, I think.
Well, it's interesting you saying bouncing back, and I've said the word a couple times, resilience. But you saying that right there, man, just like I experienced in sports and now in the business world and authoring and all the different things, is I realize I don't want to use the word fear. I mean, but I'm still concerned. I worry. I have anxiety, but I have grown. I hadn't thought about it in this way, in the same frame of resilience. Just faith that you're not gonna wake up tomorrow homeless. I mean,
Yeah.
it's gonna be okay. If you get smacked down, like you talked about, I think we've learned. Yeah, to me, it's faith somewhat, which I know is a very spiritual term, but faith is just it's trusting in something you decide to trust in, or you've got the experience that it's gonna be okay, or it's gonna work out.
Yeah. You know what I've been, do you know Eckhart Tolle at all?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I've been listening to him. I had his The Power of Now. I had the CDs, and I would listen to them, like, driving around. A couple of years, it was a while back. And sometimes it was great, and sometimes I was like, "Oh, if it's too slow for me. I don't know if I fully buy into what he's saying. It sounds a little crazy." But a friend of mine was listening to him, like, sending me some of these clips of him on YouTube recently. And for whatever reason, it's resonating with me right now. And one of the things he talks about, and I just listened to one this morning when I was working out, he was talking about, um, the narrative, the self-talk.
Yeah.
And this is actually what I think he's saying, if I have it right. It's like, even the good self-talk and the negative self-talk, any of it, it's not really you. It's a narrative that you've created. It's a and it's not necessarily based in reality. It's a fabricated narrative. A lot of times it's negative and it puts us in a worse space. But his thing is like, being in nature. Um, when he speaks, he does this thing where he pauses and tells you, listen to the space between my words. And like the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, what is he doing? And you kind of lean in, and his
Yeah.
thing is like, pay attention to the space between the words. Or when you go outside or you go for a walk, maybe don't have a podcast or a song going, like, listen to the wind, listen to, just be, like, take your mind out of the equation. And I think there's something in that allows you to kind of have faith. It's like, oh, I can stop. Like, sometimes the worry, we think, oh, I'm going to worry so much that I'm going to help myself. I'm going to get back in. This anxiety is going to help. It's like, sometimes you do have to take your hands off the wheel and go, it's going to work out. I'm not going to lay around on the couch eating bonbons all day, but there are things that are going to help me that are out of my control. And sometimes there are going to be things that are going to happen to me that are out of my control, and I will deal with them. But, we can't, sometimes you just have to allow yourself to just kind of make do with what is literally happening to you right in the moment, you
Well,
know?
your comment on the narrative, I agree. We tend to think that we're germinating these thoughts, as opposed to, I think you're right. I wake up in the morning and there's an autoplay already going on, good or bad. And so if I look at it over here, it was actually a guy, John Eldridge. He's a Christian, known as a Christian author, but it was something that he said in a book or something I saw him. And he said, we have these thoughts and we agree with them. And I really like that perspective of so as you said, here's this narrative that I wake up in the morning, autoplay is going on, and I don't consciously, but I agree with it and I walk forward, and it can be good or bad. And I've been just as imprisoned by some of the, positive, good narratives that I've agreed with to my own demise sometimes, as
What's
opposed
an example of that? Like what? Like what? I'm interested in that.
my upbringing. I was an only child the first 7 years of my life. So I was the focus. I was the golden child. Everything was positive, and all these positive. Kevin's so mature. Kevin's so insightful. Kevin's old for his age. Kevin's, wins everything, whatever. And man, I embraced that stuff. So that narrative was given to me. I mean, who doesn't want to tell their kids good things? It's
Yeah.
nothing against my parents, but for whatever reason, man, I embraced that. That became my identity. And so that narrative's going along, and I let myself get imprisoned to where I couldn't lose, or I couldn't be thought of badly. And honestly, Matt, it's still uh, the most acute place that it comes out today is I have such an averse perspective of conflict, because I do not want someone to think bad of me, which is just impossible, especially if you got a platform. Some people are going to, and it's not that it devastates me, but I'm not, I don't want someone to think that I have had ill will, that I have put myself before them, whatever, which I'm human and I do. And it's still a piece of there's that narrative that I have embraced. And it's been I think it's always, I'm 50 now. It's a continual letting go. But you talking about that narrative that we all have, that then if I think about it, I look at it and I have to agree with it or not. That's, it's mind blowing. Uh,
Yeah.
that it's not, back to what you said. It kind of paints it to where what is reality? We can't claim what it is. And then you get into
It's
the hoodoo guru of we make it. And that, there's, to me, it's a tension. It's not, I can't define it.
I think I think there is a reality, and then we all perceive the facts differently. We interpret them through our own experiences, our history, our instrument. It's the same way I talk about acting. I always say, like, I have a coach that would say, what's your jumping off point with this character? And the gist of that is like, do you overlap with this character? And a lot of times that's helpful, because if you're playing a character who's, I'm putting this in quotes, an evil character or
Right.
whatever, it's like no one wakes up and thinks they're evil. They think what they're doing is the right way to do it. And so if you're playing a character, you can't judge that character. You have to kind of get under their skin and defend their point of view to the world. But what I always say is, like, you're all actors. What we're doing is we are interpreting. We're taking the author's text, screenwriter's text, whatever, and we can only filter it through one machine, and that's us. And hopefully we can get ourselves to somewhat of a neutral, so we can take on different characters and have range as actors. But at the end of the day, every single script that I read is getting filtered through the lens and the machinery of Matt del Negro, and all that means, all of my history, all of my experiences, everything. So, what is the truth? I don't know. Like, that's why 10 different actors can take the same character, and there's going to be 10 different interpretations,
That's
because
interesting.
there's no, there will, hopefully there will be overlaps between their portrayals, but there's going to be different nuances and idiosyncrasies based on those different actors. And I think the truth is like that. It's like, I don't know, what's the truth? Who's right here? Who's wrong here? I don't know. I mean, like,
I got an actor question for you then.
Yeah.
How, when you look at actors getting, are you most likely going to, over the span of your career, get hired on to do roles that do fall in line more with who you naturally are? Is that if you look at the best actors, ever, do they generally shine the most in that, or is it the ones who are just able to play a certain role? I mean, there's got to have been somebody who's consistently been depicted for whatever reason as, let's say, the bad guy, because they do it so well. And yet sometimes I look at those people and say, man, if they've been in 10 roles knocked out of the park as a bad guy, are they really bad? Or are they just really good at playing that part? That
A
makes
lot of
sense.
times they're just really good at playing that part.
Okay.
In terms of that question, I would say there are some, I would say there's kind of like a difference between being a star and being an actor. And there are some stars who are actors, and there are some, but not all of them. Well, they're actors, but they're not necessarily with a wide range. Like sometimes people are being cast repeatedly in a similar role based on their essence, right? A lot of times,
Kevin Costner.
yeah, but I mean, but once you have someone, once in a while you'll have, like, if you look at like the Meryl Streeps or the Christian Bales, or,
Mhm.
look at Marlon Brando, you look at people that have had a wide, really wide range, they're actors. And then a lot of people that are lesser known, they're taking on all these different roles. Look at Gary Oldman. I mean, he's a chameleon, he's also a star now, but he's kind of like an actor first,
Okay.
and then there
Right.
are people that are more, they're cast on their essence. I do think there's something to be said for, and I hope that if I look at my work that I've gotten more this way. I think the more comfortable in your own skin you are, the more, there's something about, there are certain actors that you can look at. It's like they're comfortable in their own skin. Like I'm thinking of like Jack Nicholson.
Uh-huh.
It's like he's got an essence. Like you watch him and and he's played a variety of roles, but he's always so. I almost think like his superpower is that he he's so unpredictable in a way, and he's so comfortable in his own skin that it's always like on edge. You're always watching him,
Yeah.
like wondering what he's going to do next, and there's something, there's an essence that he has, and I think it's probably something he has in his own life where he's just kind of like, he is who he is, and that's compelling for people to watch.
That's being comfortable in your own skin. Let me throw something at you just on this issue of, I mean, because we talk about being a victim or not. I mean, it requires that there's got to be some level of peace with yourself. You even talked about um, Eckhart and that pause and being in the woods. I mean, I don't know how many times it comes up. Seems like it's monthly, where Pascal made the quote of man's one of his greatest inabilities is the ability to sit alone in a room for 15 minutes just with himself, be comfortable, in their own skin. And yet we so often have these fears, we have these worries, and we can go in that victim mentality, and we blame. I mean, have you found yourself, have you gotten to a point of it being a conscious narrative somewhat in your mind of not blaming? If you had to come there and proactively say, I am not going, I have a reason to, arguably, I'm not going to blame.
Have I consciously? Yeah, I think I have, because I think there have been periods in my career, or just in my life, even outside of the career, where, you could look at other people and think, well, they had it easier. Why are they getting the breaks and I didn't get the breaks? And then, you also know, like, someone's looking at you thinking that about you at the same time. They're going like, why is Del Negro working more than I am? Um, but I think I mean, I think had to be conscious about that, kind of like the first example you brought up, and with that post. It's like, when you catch yourself in that zone, at least when I do, when I catch myself in that zone, of it could be so subtle. There are times when I go, oh, I'm no, I'm doing this is a negative. Like I'm thinking, I'm automatically thinking like, oh, everybody else has it easier than I do. And I kind of go, that's not true. And I kind of have to like realign and then almost just free myself of that thought and move on. And it's, whether it's breathing or it's going and taking a walk, taking the dogs for a walk, uh, you know, something to kind of break that spell. Sometimes it's physical. Sometimes you got to go for a run. You got whatever you have to do. It's like you have to change it up, change up your pattern, because you can dig yourself into a groove
Yeah.
that's not really helping your cause. It's
Do
just
you
making it worse.
do you have an area in either your work or your personal life where you need to take affirmative action against a victim mentality? I don't know, one for me that I've had to, I've done well in kind of overcoming it to some degree, but I realized I let my family be that. I would make excuses, feel victim in my work and my ability, my progress there because of this huge family, over here that I have. And I realized it, just kind of became conscious and realized I'm using that. There's a bitterness in there or a blaming in there. And it was after realizing, it was doing a show with somebody that I wish I could remember, and realizing how much I need pressure. I react to pressure. Otherwise, I just go off scatterbrain, procrastinate, and do God knows what, and get, I just lose focus and get distracted. I need the pressure. That's what I respond to. I respond to my schedule. I respond to deadlines. And it occurred to me and thought, man, it's kind of like if you need something done, give it to the busiest person at the office because they're just used to getting stuff done. Well,
Yeah.
that's me. And I, having the kids, having all the pressures, having all the deadlines, it's probably God's grace on me that I need those things to produce anything, that without those, I'd be even worse in my businesses, and in my vocation. So but I still have to watch that sometimes. It's using that as an excuse uh,
Yeah.
in there.
Well,
And so that,
we have a joke with my wife is like, she's like, you can thank me when you win your Oscar. You could put me in the speech, because I'm always like, if I didn't have, like, I mean, in joking and sometimes serious, but
yeah,
I'm like, do you realize all the stuff that I need to do that like that, and I'm doing all this for everybody, whatever it might be. And she's like, you can thank me in your Oscar speech. It's like it's like the alternative is, you could have all the time in the world, but when I think back to before I was married, before I had kids, I actually think I get more done now. I will complain about it to my family sometimes, but
mm-hmm.
I think I actually get a lot more done now than I did when I had a lot more time, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Um, and, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think though, but your original question, because you were
Well, if
saying, do
there's an
I
area where you find yourself,
habitually blaming?
yeah, or just kind of, you have a more slippery slope there of, man,
Mm,
yeah, maybe it's something in your work or, yeah, personal life, whatever, where you can find yourself for some reason more with a higher tendency to fall into that feeling of blame or victimhood than others. Because I have some areas where it just doesn't exist, man. I'm solid, I'm good, I'm healthy, whatever. And
yeah.
then that's what I'm saying. Sometimes over here with work and all the build up, man, I've got, yeah, just like that. I've got so much going on. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. The
Yeah,
cameras aren't
yeah. You know
seeing.
what? I think I do that with and sometimes maybe it's right, but I don't know. Sometimes it's like I think the uncertainty of my life and my schedule, because the nature of my business, it really is kind of crazy. It's like you can't it's very hard to plan things like long-term things, because you don't know if you're going to be working, you're going to be away, you could be out of the state, you could be out of the country, you could um, you know, the biggest joke we have is, if I want a job and I'm out of work, like plan a vacation that you actually want to go on because you'll get work. Like it happens all the time. It's like,
That's good.
or so I'll do that sometimes where I would, the rest of my immediate family, my nuclear family from growing up, not my wife and kids, like my brother, my sister, my parents, they had more like just slightly more conventional schedules. So like my brother would say, what are you guys doing, for Thanksgiving? And it's like, 5 months ahead of time or whatever it might be. Or what are you doing some weekend? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow sometimes, And so I think to answer your question, there can be like a habitual blaming or victimhood about that uncertainty.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
um, I think when, and some of it is justified because sometimes it is really, truly, if I told you, it's like, you're like, oh God, like it really changes on a dime. On the other hand, that's exciting too. And sometimes we've been able to, um, get have experiences that other people haven't been able to have because it's like that. Um, where we can do something kind of exciting because we're not tied to the same schedule that other people are,
Yeah, totally. And when you talk about, you mentioned the word power, and that has been the one that is stuck with me the most on this topic of being a victim of blame, is that when we give, let's just say, that blame, that accusation over here, we are giving our power away. And yet, it's what, do you know Tom Bilyeu?
I do.
He's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I had him on the show long time ago. It was a little bit after that a video came out as an excerpt from, I think he was being interviewed, and somebody asked him like what a paramount issue was for him on success. And he stopped, paused, and he said, "It's all your fault." He said, "That's the perspective I want to emulate, and I want people to." And he took a hard line. He said, "Because fault, that's a volatile word. Nobody wants to be at fault." But he says, "I'm going to believe that it's all my fault." And he makes this facetious thing that if a plane or a meteor or something like that is in the sky, falls out of the sky, lands in his house, and crushes his wife, he's going to say, "It's all my fault." Now, he says, of course, that's stupid. How could it be his fault? But to give the blame over here takes his power away. There's 100 things he could say. And but then you get into, and here's what I wanted to throw at you, because I get that, and I have the tendency to say, yes, I want to keep that power. I'm going to say it's all my fault. I can be big enough to do that. And yet to hear that and to say it's my fault, if we can't do that with grace for ourselves, I think it falls flat. And we're not in a very gracious society with that. So how can we say it's all my fault? I'm not going to put blame, but can we do that and marry it with grace? Otherwise, then we're just perpetually, you're blaming ourselves, and that doesn't go anywhere ever. So it's just that kind of the grappling of, how do you do that? Don't give away the power. Don't annihilate yourself with blame either.
You're making me think, first of all, Tom Bilyeu is great, but you're
Mm-hmm.
making me think of Will Smith has this thing. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And his
Okay.
example is like, if somebody puts a newborn baby on your doorstep and runs away and leaves it there, and you open the door and there's the baby, it's not your fault that the baby is there, but now it is your responsibility.
Yeah.
And like his point is, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. This is the situation. You're dealing with it now, whether you want or not, you are responsible. And by owning the responsibility, I think goes back to Bilyeu's point of, you have more power. Yeah, you have it's like, there are a lot of actors, and myself included. You can point like, oh, it's this, it's that. You can gripe about the system, but when you own your part in it, then you have to face the music
Yeah.
Am I doing everything I can do? Am I training as hard as I can? Am I making the calls that I need to make on my behalf? Have I done it all? It's a lot easier to blame over there, blame over there, blame over there, but it doesn't really get you anything. It doesn't really do anything for you.
It doesn't. Well, it reminds me then of extreme ownership, which has been made famous now by Jocko, of taking extreme ownership. Which again, I like that as well. Ownership, responsibility. I like that, and yet, and I'm just going to bounce these back and forth. I have also taken that too far into what I'm going to call a God complex of thinking I am responsible for everything, and that doesn't work either. I can't be responsible, especially for people's their own feelings, for their own behavior. I can't take responsibility for that. As a dad, I can tend to do that. Oh my gosh, I just had a kid today over here at my office. She's got a car she's trying to sell. Oh my gosh, I did walk down there. I tried to let her have the beginning, but I couldn't quite handle myself because I feel responsible. I'm the dad, I know more about this kind of crap, and I can take even the extreme ownership too far into, yeah, a God complex, Superman complex,
Yeah.
whatever. But but I guess back to Billy's point, I'd rather err on the side of responsibility, on ownership of, yeah, that we should take the word fault is just kind of a bad word altogether, but
I,
back to what you said with Will Smith, to take responsibility. What can I be
what could I
responsible
be
for?
doing better? Yeah. And then also, I guess to your point of the God conflict, what am I not responsible for? I'm not responsible
Yeah.
for whether someone likes me. Um, and that's been something because I think we have that in common. I feel like I more so used to be, but I'm still this way. You want people to like you, but I think, I hope I've gotten better about not caring quite as much about other people's opinions of me. If I think what I'm doing is helping people in some way, then that's what I'm doing. And I maybe again, that's a function of being an actor where I'm like, there's always someone talking smack out there somewhere. Like if you're in a position where a lot of people can see you, then a lot of them probably don't like you. Or I'm sure there's people out there that don't like my work or don't think I'm good or think, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do about that? Am I going to chase them down and convince them that I'm good? No, I'm good. I'm good. Or am I going to, no, 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 you like me. Look at all the stuff I'm doing. It's like, what? Yeah. Okay. It's more about like, can I look myself in the mirror and can I like it? Can I like what I see? Can I like what I'm doing? Can I stand by it? And then the rest is like, okay, hopefully at least a few people agree and I'm helping some people, and maybe, good amount of people don't agree or I'm not helping them or they're making fun of me or whatever it is. But like, yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
You know?
this is just a curiosity question, Matt. Being an actor, which I have no relation. I mean, that's a different. What's like speaking Greek? I have no concept really of that. In that, do you find this may just be a personal question? I don't know if it's an acting question because I don't know if I can paint the broad picture across all people who are in that profession. Is it just as easy to be yourself, or easier, or do you sometimes have to guard against a facade, a persona, acting? Have you ever been called out of not being authentic just in your
Uh,
own
in my work or in my life?
life?
I mean, I'm sure I have in some capacity or someone's thought that. I think, from feedback I've heard and from what I hope is that most people at least who have known me or dealt with me or friends of mine or even just, whether it's other parents or whatever, would be like, yeah, he's pretty, he is who he is. Um, I don't know if that's particular to um, my profession. I've had a lot of people tell me like, "Oh, you don't seem like an actor," and I take that
I was,
as a
I was going to say, is that a compliment or not?
I think it's a compliment in the way that they're saying it. At least that's how I'm interpreting it. But no, I think it is. I think because in that context, where I've heard it, I think they're saying like, "Oh, I expected you to be, blah blah blah, whatever it is," because I think people have images of what that means, what an actor is, and I don't. I think I always say like, I feel like I'm like a dad and a husband and just a guy, and I act. That's what I do. That's what I love to do. Um, that's what I do for work. I guess if somebody, you know, if it was at like a, Q&A after a screening of a movie and someone said, "You don't seem like an actor," I'd be like, I don't think that's a compliment.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, but in the context of where someone's saying it in like some situation where they just, I meet them on the plane and they're sitting next to me and I'm talking to them and they don't realize they've never seen me do anything or whatever. And then they go, "Oh, you don't seem like an actor." I take that as a compliment because I
Yeah.
think it's just, but yeah, I mean,
Well,
I'd like to think I'm pretty
down to earth is what I would
straight up.
say.
I hope. Yeah.
Absolutely, and relatable. So let's end here on this aspect, going through what we've talked about. Being a victim, taking responsibility, not blaming. Uh, I'm going to go back to, and you mentioned it a minute ago, but yeah, it's on page 81, where willful denial. And when we talk about reality, and that it's just one that I hold delicately, because I find more people suffering from feeling like reality is reality. It just is. And yet over here, reality is so much of what you make of it. We have so much power, back to that word, in when we look at that. But you can go too far. So back to your willful denial, and you actually, as a word guy, you actually give the definitions of both willful and denial in the book. How do you use that in the crafting of your own, let's just say, a positive reality, an opportunistic reality? Back to what you said about these things, that these people who created things that didn't exist. That's the topic of Marie Forleo's book, Everything's Figure Outable, that everything we see, this Nalgene bottle didn't exist. And somebody thought, for camping, I wonder if we could create a bottle that won't break. It didn't exist. And somebody told them they were stupid, and they
Yeah.
figured it out. So they didn't take that no, the 10,000 no's, and accept that. They had, well, to what you said, willful denial.
Yeah. Marie actually was a guest of mine as well. She's great. She's awesome. And her husband he's an actor. Um, yeah, I guess I use it. Look, I'm not saying to be in denial of, I use it very specifically. I
Okay.
use it. It's more in the areas where, um, the best way to put it would be, I advise young actors. I say, listen, you think you have this something that you feel is special on the inside, and people aren't buying it yet. They don't see it. They don't see it. You're getting no external validation. I know that
Right.
because years without making money in the beginning, years. Um, that can be, if I paid attention to um, just the blatant facts, nobody would pay me to act. People would barely hire me to do stuff for free. I mean, I did stuff, but it was like, but if I really put my nose in that, I would probably say, I'm going to quit. Here it is. This is obvious. It's not happening. But I had willful denial. I thought, you're wrong. I know something you don't know. And maybe it's not, maybe my diamond is so far in the rough that I still need to, buff it out until you could see it shining, but it's there. And that's how I use willful denial. It's like it's saying, not going to listen to your assessment of me. Now, at the same time, I know people that are no longer acting that really, maybe were not good and couldn't hear the teacher's critique of them or criticism of them. And like, you have to be open. So I'm not saying that you're just like completely have blinders on. I mean, you need to have a sense of self and a sense of yourself in the grand scheme of things. But what I'm saying is deny the present moment, which is maybe not as great as you want it to be. Like, hold off and will your version of it into existence with hard work, with patience, with faith, with listening to criticism and getting better, like pivoting as a result of criticism, all of that, not total like earmuffs on, but just earmuffs against some of the things that might sink you if you really took them too far to heart.
Well, you said a couple of things just in these last ending things, talking about advising young actors when there's so often no external validation, talking about yourself, diamond in the rough, but believing something is there. And just right there in the ending things that you said, you actually said a few things and said faith. I keep coming back to that, Matt, as we're sitting here talking about that as an antidote to a victim mentality is having faith in, well, you said the grand scheme of things, which I think most people believe in something bigger than themselves to some capacity, even if it's just the humanity, bigger than themselves, of serving, having faith in that, and then having faith in ourselves. If we don't have faith, I don't know how I wouldn't fall into a victim mentality with the things that are going to happen to us if I didn't have some abiding faith in maybe in my own goodness, even beyond my own ability. But just knowing that, and here, I mean, that's so much of your book, 10,000 No's, that it happens day in and day out and day in and day out. And you have grown, and not a callous, but a faith is what I keep hearing from hearing you testify to, is a faith in
Totally.
yourself.
Yeah. I would say, you know what? I have a faith because, the flip side to work ethic and grinding and faith in yourself and all that is like, I would be really, really arrogant to ignore the fact that there were many times, I would say many times in my career where I literally thought, dude, you're delusional, you're crazy, and you should quit. I mean, like, when you said before, like, you're never going to be on the street, I would have the thought of like, I'm going to be on the street. Like, whether it was, exaggerated anxiety or whatever, I really did. I mean, I've had so many periods where I thought like I am at the brink. I'm on thin, 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 thin ice.
Yeah.
And out of nowhere, it would seem, and it's not like it happened once, it's happened many times. A great job would just seem to drop from the heavens into my lap. Yeah. And I would just go, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's something, depending on who's listening, some people are, oh, come on, what are you talking about? Like, that's bullshit, right? And other people are going to know, I can see that for myself. I'm just telling you from my own experiences, I have seen like, it doesn't end and begin with me. Like, I've been helped, and I've been helped by people. I've been helped, just by having parents that are great, just by having coaches and teachers that are great. And a wife that's great, and friends and kids, it's, none of us is in this thing. I'd love to tell you like, oh yeah, anything that I've done well was all me, but that would be BS. I mean, like, I've been the recipient of a lot of goodwill, and honestly, sometimes things have really seemed to come out of nowhere when I'm really, really down, and like, career wise, like a great role lands in my lap after a dark period, and I go, wow. And so I have faith. So the next time I'm in that situation, I'll just go, That could happen last time you got out.
Man, this is why I wanted to do this conversation. It wasn't just to espouse our wisdom, but it's just to think through the realities of living day to day life and work and family. And I have not married victim and faith together until now. And I will be from this point on. I'll be thinking and pondering and probably writing some about it. Uh, Man, really good. Help me think through it as well. Thanks for
That's
coming
cool.
on and just
No,
having the
thanks, sir. No, I
conversation.
told you that first time we talked was so much fun that when you hit me up, I was like, yeah, I'm like, I
Well,
don't care.
it
Send me a Zoom
was
link. I'm in. I'm in.
it was
Yeah.
timely to me thinking about that and to see you posting that. And I appreciate. I've been watching your Instagram posts and appreciate what you're putting out there to help influence people and make their lives
Thanks.
better. Man, thank you for doing what you do. Thanks for coming on here again.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it's my pleasure, man.